Coaching a difficult team member, it requires three things: patience, empathy, and a strategic approach. And I want you to think about it as you're not there to fix someone. You are guiding them towards their full potential. Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast, a free resource for women who work in the sports and entertainment industry. Each week, we get real and talk about the things that hold us back and how we can overcome them and keep climbing to the top. And the top is however you define it. We talk about the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Consider this podcast your secret weapon. You will learn from the best in the business and be able to take immediate action with all the advice that you hear. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake, a leadership development coach and consultant. I've worked in sports for 20 years. 15 of those years were spent working for the Red Sox, Dodgers, and the Cubs. After 15 years of working in the front office, I took a leap of faith and I started my own business. Friends, as a Black woman in sports, I know that the industry can take a toll on your confidence and sometimes leave you feeling defeated. Join me each week so I can support you on your journey. I promise you, each week you will feel stronger and more confident than the week before. So let's get started with this week's episode. We've all been there, dealing with a difficult employee who reports to you. You know what that looks like, right? A difficult employee, lack of communication, low performance. They have a negative attitude or they are resisting any change that you are trying to implement or the organization is trying to implement. They're disrespectful. They don't do what's asked of them. They bring the team down because of poor team participation. So we've all been there. I can tell you this, my clients, when they come to me to talk about how do they navigate these waters with a difficult employee, they typically do a bunch of venting first, and I'm here for it, and I listen. I hear things like frustration, anger, anxiety around it, like just confusion, like why is this happening? And then disappointment. All of those are natural feelings. The downfall of these emotions is that they can sometimes impact your performance. So when you're frustrated or you're filled with anxiety, that can hinder your decision-making or your creativity. When you're angry, others can feel that anger, others at work. Now, I'm not saying you can't get angry at work. However, I'm saying if you are consistently angry and just pissed off because at work because of this one employee who is beyond difficult, your team, so other people who report to you and your coworkers will start to take notice. I know as a strong leader and manager, you invest a lot of time into your employees. And when problems arise, such as difficult employees, it can just feel defeating and just you feel a sense of disappointment. Listen, I want to help. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about 10 tips for dealing with a difficult employee. So before I jump into these tips, there are two things I want to discuss. They aren't sexy. And a lot of times we avoid the topic. We don't bring it up or we feel shame. Managers feel shame around these topics. I want to normalize them. I just want to talk about them and I want you to feel comfortable. I want to say feel comfortable talking about them, yes, but also just know that it's okay that you're feeling that way and it's okay to talk about it with people that you trust. So the first one is avoiding coaching difficult employees. And I want to talk about why it's so tempting to do that. I want to normalize those temptations. I don't want you to give in to them, so please don't do that. But I want you to know that you're not alone. There's a long list, but I want to talk about 5 common reasons that managers avoid dealing with difficult employees. You might roll your eyes or you might feel that way and feel a little embarrassed that you have, but that's okay. One is you have a fear of confrontation. Just be honest with yourself if you're one of those people. It's okay. There's a lot of people who have a fear of confrontation. And then there's a lot of people who love it. But what I hear from the managers who come to me, my clients, they have a fear of confrontation. Number 2 is a lack of time. I don't have time for this bullshit. I have my own career and here I am babysitting this difficult employee who won't listen to me and I'm trying to help them get ahead in their career. I get it. You feel uncertain about the right approach to dealing with this employee, this difficult employee. There's a 1,000 different paths you can take and you're just not sure about the right one. You could be a new manager and this is your first time dealing with it. You could be a veteran manager and the last 2 approaches you took didn't work. Or, as we all know, one size doesn't fit all. You have to sort of tailor your approach to each individual employee, which takes a lot of your time. Another reason we're so tempted to just avoid it and hope it goes away, you're worried that the employee is going to be resistant to your coaching and push back. Now you got a fight on your hand. That's what it feels like, at least. Last is, and I think this is a big one, there's a lack of trust in your organization and your leadership to have your back. Meaning you just don't think they're going to back you up on this. Why would you go down this path only to have your organization just kind of not have your back and you're just kind of out there alone on an island? Why would you put all that energy into it? So I get it. These are reasons why we just try to avoid it, and the temptations that lead us to avoid it, and then sort of feel a little embarrassed about it when it does get out of hand and it does blow up, because that's what's going to happen if you avoid coaching a difficult employee. It's going to start to impact the rest of your team, and it eventually starts to impact your organization. Your leaders will start to notice. Friend, let me tell you, it is better for you to guide this difficult employee instead of having your boss jump in and do it for you. Now, you can keep your boss up to date with what's going on and talk to them about your approach and get some feedback. Typically, your boss manager is somebody who has a little bit more experience, typically more experience in this area, or they might not have any. I reported to somebody who never managed people before, but they will have the ability to talk it out with you and kind of help you shape the approach. And so you're not making these decisions in, a bubble all by yourself. It's always a smart idea to take them along for the ride, but don't let them take control of the situation. When I say them, your boss, don't let your boss take control of the situation because you gave into these temptations of avoiding the difficult employee. I promise you, growth is on the other side of this. The temptations are there. Sometimes we all have been there and we all give into it and think it's just going to be okay. It's okay to feel those feelings. It's okay I have a fear. I don't want to deal with this person. I just don't feel like dealing with confrontation today. And then today becomes a week becomes a month, and you haven't dealt with this employee and then it blows up. It's okay to have those feelings, but don't let it go too far. The second thing I want to talk about before we get to the 10 tips, also not sexy, is understanding why a lot of us take it personally. Now, I have clients who call me. I have friends who call me, old coworkers. I guess they're also friends who call me, and it gets under your skin. When I sit back and I listen and I'm not in it, I'm like, oh, this person's taking it personally. So I want to talk about this for just a minute, and then I promise we're going to get to the 10 tips. We've all been there, taking shit personal at work, and we know we shouldn't, but we can't help it. This is our life, right? I hate when people say, oh, just don't take it personally. Well, it takes a little bit more than just thanks. Hadn't thought of that. Great idea, right? It takes some work, and that could be another podcast episode that we dive into, but I want you to know it's okay to feel that way. It's okay that those feelings come up to the surface. Acknowledge them. Say, hey, I see you. And perhaps now, when we're going to go through them in a minute, you understand them and you know that you're not alone. You know what they are. You know other managers are feeling that same thing. They just don't talk about it. You can start to separate the feeling of taking it personally. It takes a minute. It takes practice. The first step in that practice is self-awareness. If we understand them, we can manage our emotional response. So let's talk about a couple of them. One reason we take it personally is because we have this feeling of a sense of failure. As leaders, as managers, we take pride in our ability to build this team and manage a team. So when you have this difficult employee, it's natural to look at their behavior as a personal failure. So we may feel that their actions sometimes reflect poorly on our ability, our leadership skills. We immediately take that in and carry that around. I want you to remember that difficult employees are not a reflection of your worth. Instead, focus on your role as a guide or a coach. If you're going to manage people throughout your career, you are going to run into difficult employees. I want you to separate your personal feeling, identity from their behavior and figure out ways to focus on their behavior, how that's impacting the organization negatively, and then address the changes. We'll talk more about that in the 10 tips. Another reason we take it personally is we're so protective of our team, and this starts to have an impact on team dynamics. Difficult employees have the potential, and they usually do it. They disrupt the team dynamics. They create a little bit of conflict within the group. And we take that personal because we feel responsible for keeping that positive work environment. You want to shift your focus from personal emotions to the overall team dynamics. Take yourself just out of it for a minute and think about if you were giving advice to someone else who was going through the same thing. Take yourself out of it and understand that it's okay. Addressing difficult behavior is going to come up. And you taking the lead and managing your difficult employee, you are doing it for the well-being of the entire team in the organization. Third reason we take it personally is emotional investment. We put a lot of time and energy into the personal connections we develop with our team. So when we have somebody who's being a pain in the ass, let's just say it how it is, we might feel betrayed or hurt because we've made an investment in that person. Their behavior can feel like a personal attack on the relationship that you worked so hard to build. Okay, 2 more on why we take it personally and just understanding why. Fear of conflict. So we talked about fear of confrontation, fear of conflict, same thing. Naturally, we dislike it, including leaders. I know there's some people out there that just seem like they really enjoy it. So dealing with a difficult employee often involves uncomfortable conversations. And with that uncomfortable conversation, if you're dealing with a difficult employee, they're probably going to be resistant and push back. That fear of conflict can lead us to take their behavior personally. One thing to think about, recognize that if you get in there, address the behavior, it's your job, embrace the discomfort, focus on the solution. We're going to talk about those things in a little bit. I want you to know that for you personally, growth is going to be on the other side of it. Feeling that fear of conflict is normal, but I want you to get comfortable with being uncomfortable because that's how you start to grow in your career. Last one, and this one is such a common one. There's a need for approval. You have a need for approval. We, as leaders, have a desire for our employees to like and respect us. I mean, is that asking too much? No. But when we're faced with difficult behavior, we worry about losing that approval. We worry about losing that relationship. This fear can make us take the behavior personally, and we crave validation. And we want positive feedback because we're working so hard and we can't figure out why this person is just not falling into place. We want them to approve how things are working. We want them to validate it. Think about that because I know some people are listening. I don't care what they think. Whatever, they can do whatever they want. That's fine. I want you to think hard about that. And I've asked clients this before and they take a minute and they realize, yeah, I guess you're right. I am sort of seeking approval here. I didn't even think about it. When I have a client who's in this situation, I don't assume that these 5, that they're taking things personally. I don't assume that. I don't assume that they're checking. I could check these all off the list, but I do ask a lot of questions. And sometimes we find a few of them, sometimes we find all 5 of them as to why it's getting under their skin and why they're taking it personally. Once you realize it, it's like a light bulb goes off and you're able to shift your focus and shift your perspective and move forward. You don't let it get in the way of coaching your employee. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the tips, but I will leave you with this. Taking difficult employee behavior personally is a common response. We don't talk about it. Everyone kind of keeps it to themselves, or they find a friend or 2 that they vent to, or a coach or a mentor, and they vent to them. But remember, it can hinder our ability to effectively address the issues. So when you understand the reasons behind this and why you're taking it personally, right, such as what we talked about, sense of failure, impact on team dynamics, emotional investments, when you realize these, you're able to make a shift. All right, Game of Your Own listeners, let's move into these 10 tips of dealing with a difficult team member. Number 1, understand their perspective. The key here is active listening, empathy and active listening. So we want to remove our personal feelings. I know it's hard, but if we understand why, it becomes easier to remove our personal feelings and listen to them. Take time to understand what the challenge is, what is going on with them, and just ask as many questions as you can so you can be crystal clear as to what their perspective is and what the problem is. Don't worry about solving the problem. Do not worry about coming up with a response or coming up with I know what the problem is, and go in with your own agenda. I know what the problem is. I'm just going to ask a couple questions to make them think that I'm listening, but I know what the problem is. Go in like you just have no idea and ask a ton of questions, and then repeat it back to them when you finally get down to the root cause. Number 2, this is something you should do with your employees before they become difficult. But I understand we don't have a lot of time. We're asked to do so much and we have to move quickly. Even when you start like a new job or a new role within the same organization and you are like, here are your employees, here's your team, they're going to report to you. Sometimes you don't have time to do the second one, which is set clear expectations. So it's okay if you didn't have time. We've all been there. This right now is a time to pause and set clear expectations. Clearly define the goals and objectives of your team members. This could be a good time to just have a reset with everybody to talk about these things. Clear expectations provide a roadmap for success and make it easier for you to address any performance gaps along the way. So set expectations that sets your team up for success. They know exactly what is being asked of them and when they have to do it by, what you want it to look like. You go over everything with them. Then when they start to miss, it's so easy to go back and say, hey, we set these expectations. Here's where you're missing. Let's talk about why. How can I help you so you're no longer missing, so we can close this gap? So set clear expectations. Once you understand their perspective and you start to move forward, you'll be able to see those gaps and set clear expectations. Provide constructive feedback. I know that sounds so elementary and like, of course I will. I know I've been there where I've received feedback and I'm like, can you give me an example? What does that even, like, I don't even know what that means. I don't understand. That happened once in 365 days. What are you talking about? Make sure you have very specific and timely constructive feedback. A great approach is to make sure you frame the feedback in a way that highlights the area that you want them to improve on. So you can offer your solutions and your guidance to them as well, but make sure you frame it in a way like, here's how we can improve. And if you know their goals, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, it's easier to point them towards that. So make sure you focus. I think a mistake that is often made by managers is focus on the behaviors and actions rather than personal attacks. Number 4, focus on strengths. So while it's important to address areas of improvement, like we just talked about, constructive feedback, it's okay to talk about the strengths and the positive contributions that they make. Think about when you go into a meeting. I guess we're all different. I like to hear what I need to improve on, less about what I do well. Because if you tell me all the things I do well and then end it with like 2 things that I need to focus on and improve on, I get a little content. Well, I'm doing really well. I used to be this way in soccer when I played back in the day. I didn't want to hear what I did well. I wanted you to tell me what I need to focus on. Now, you can do that with your team, especially your team member who's being difficult. However, I think it's important to know your employee and know how much they want you to focus on the strengths. I know, right? Managing people is a full-time job. It really is a full-time job on top of your other job. If you want to know your employees, that's really important, and know what you need to give them. You need to give everybody a little bit of focus on their strengths. You don't have to dive into it if there's someone like me who doesn't need all of that. But if they are, you want to list out, hey, this is what's working and going really well. Okay, I just want to acknowledge that. Okay, now I want to talk about the things that are not going well and talk about how we can make those strengths of yours. Done. Focus on the strengths, and then you move over to where they need to improve. Number 5, set goals. Make sure they're attainable goals. It blows my mind. Not every organization I worked for had goals for me. I did my best work when the organization had priorities and goals. We were able to determine what my goals were based on the organization's goals. Like, that's very crystal clear and makes a lot of sense. and allows me to understand how I fit into the bigger organization. I get it. Again, full-time job on top of your full-time job, managing a team. And sometimes you run out of time and you don't have time to set goals for people, or you set goals and they're not attainable, or you set goals and they're not measurable. If you take the time to set goals ahead of time with your team, it is easy to point back to the goals and talk about performance gaps. Here's our goal. We all agreed on this. This is where the gap is. I know that you're upset and you don't agree with what we're doing. This is the direction the organization is going. I've shared your feedback with, leadership. However, this is how we're moving. A lot of times it happens, you get an employee who just wants to keep pushing back and doesn't want to get on board with the change that has come. Hey, it's okay. But if you want to move forward in the position that you're in, this is when it gets difficult for you. Or it could. Let me not project on you. This is when it gets difficult. Hey, I understand how you feel. I've raised your concerns several times, but now we need to move forward. Here are the goals that we talked about, or here are the goals that we're setting now, moving forward. And this is how you are being measured. There's no question. And this is when, or I'll get to the next one in a minute, that you want to ask them to, hey, bring this up every time we have a meeting. Talk about how you're doing on your goals. I will expect that of you. Again, setting the expectation. And as they move forward, you can celebrate their accomplishments. And if there's still a performance gap, you can start to address that. And I will say, I don't talk about HR policy and consulting with the HR department because every organization is different. If you have an HR department that has rules about what this looks like when you have difficult employees, make sure you bring them along for the ride and document it. Number 6, establish open lines of communication. It is important that you guys have one-on-one meetings with your direct reports. I recommend that you do it weekly for 30 minutes. If you don't have 30 minutes, try 15 minutes. Make the meetings structured so your team knows what to expect every single time that they meet, and put it on them. You could set the agenda. That's a weekly agenda. You don't have to change it every week, and set it on your team member to come in and present, and I'm doing air quotes, present to you. So what are you working on? What's one win? Where are you stuck that I can help? You can get through a lot in 15 minutes with that. You don't need to do anything except tell your team that that's what you expect of them. Set it up, whatever that agenda looks like. That's something that I've used in the past. My clients have used in the past. A few people on the podcast use that structure with their employees, but find the structure that works for you and make sure you have open lines of communication. When you do that, you create a safe environment for your team members to feel comfortable, for them to express their own thoughts. When you're in that meeting, shut your computer off. And by shut it off, I just mean, lock your screen, or put your cell phone down. Actually do both, and give them your direct, attention. Nothing is worse than when you're in a meeting and you could, if you're on Zoom, you could tell when your boss is reading something else. It's so frustrating. So make sure that you silence things. And if it's a 15-minute meeting, silence those things. If you are expecting something that is a deadline, something that's important, that if you don't get that done, this can, have really, really bad impact on the organization. Communicate that to your employee. Hey, listen, I'm going to just kind of keep one eye on my email while we talk. I don't like to do that, but here's why. Just give them a heads up. And then if you get the email, hold on, pause. Let me look at my email real quick. Okay. Just make sure you take them along for the ride. That makes them feel safe and they understand that you're not ignoring them, that this meeting is important. Number 7, document the behavior. Keep a record of the behavior. Now, I know that when it's happening, you think, I'm not going to forget this, but life moves so quickly. Work moves so quickly. So you want to make sure you write it down so you are giving an accurate account of what happened if you need to raise a concern, at a higher level. If you need to bring it back up in their performance review towards the end of the year. So if it's happening in February and you have to write a review in November, you're going to forget. If you write it down, all you do is copy paste, and then you copy and paste into a performance review. And then hopefully, me being the optimist here, you're talking about here's where they were and here's how they improved. It's the opposite way. You can say that too, but you have documented everything. I would also recommend, after you have a meeting, is just document it in an email to the employee and say, thanks for meeting, blah, blah, blah. Here's what we talked about. Here is the outcome. and here's how we're going to move forward. Let me know if there's anything I missed in this email. Please respond and confirm that this email is accurate. Something like that. You have it in writing, stick it into a folder, and then if you need it later, you have it. Number 8 is sort of a two-parter. Offer any resources you can to help your team member. Sometimes people are just stuck. Sometimes they don't know how to move forward. Sometimes you're going to have to identify resources to help them. Training programs, mentoring opportunities. They may need a coach. This is where you can tap into HR after you've had the conversation with your employee. You really identified the root cause of the problem because you listened. Number one, you listened and you understood their perspective. You were crystal clear as to what the problem is. And maybe you don't have the resources to help them because you can't be everything to all people, but there is maybe a training they need to go to. Maybe they do need a coach because they need help with their confidence. Yep, you can call me. I got you. Whatever it is, offer them a resource. This is when you want to partner with your HR department or partner with your boss if you don't have a strong HR department. And maybe that's not what they do, and that's okay. There are avenues that you can take to help them move forward. Nothing is worse than getting feedback from your boss and then being like, okay, we've identified the problem, but I still don't know how to do X. Like, I'm still stuck. I'm still, we got to the bottom of it, but I'm still stuck. So that's when you want to figure out what resources will help them get unstuck. I also recommend, so this is a two-parter, number 8, is encouraging self-reflection as well. Once this is over, they need to take some time and think about how they can improve themselves. What can they do? So maybe your meeting is a 2-parter or a 3-parter, depending on how it goes. You want to give resources? You want to ask them what they need. Right? They might not know in the very beginning, but once you identify what the root cause of the problem is, you may figure out, I want you to take a minute. Let's meet again in 2 days and talk about what could help you. Think about areas of improvement for yourself. I'm going to think of some resources as well. And then let's meet again and talk about what that looks like. And that brings you to number 9, collaboration on the action plan. Don't do it just yourself. Don't do it in a bubble and come up with something and say, here you go. Do it together. Have them have buy-in in it. Engage them to create an action plan to address the problem, to address the challenges. So this really is going to encourage ownership and commitment. And you guys came up with this together. Number 10. Okay, last tip. Number 10, monitor progress and provide support moving forward. Check in with them. Your action plan may be, we're going to meet twice a week. That seems a little aggressive. Maybe you meet twice a week for 15 minutes, once on Monday, once on Friday. And I said that feels aggressive, but that might not feel aggressive to you and the employee. Maybe it's just for a month that you guys do that. Maybe you have a 30-minute or a 40-minute check-in when you're only discussing this issue. Just depends on the size of it and the severity of it. And maybe it's just once a week. Whatever the case may be, once you send them on their way with their action plan, it's not over. There needs to be monitoring, and you have to provide support. All right, my friends. 10 tips. It's a lot. I understand. But to start, if you need additional support as you go through this, feel free to email me. I'm happy to provide you with additional support to coach your difficult employee or just coach employees or manage employees in general. Listen, coaching a difficult team member, it requires 3 things: patience, empathy, and a strategic approach. And I want you to think about it as you're not there to fix someone. You are guiding them towards their full potential. So take these 10 tips, embrace them. I hope they empower you as you start to work with your team member who is being difficult. And I hope that as you use these 10 tips, you can watch your team member flourish and start to see a change in behavior that's great for the employee. They have growth. You grow, then your team starts to grow, and then you're going to look back and be like, look at me and my high-performing team. I did that, and it was hard work, but you did that. All right, my friends, until next week.